Hi, this is Tom. Welcome to my channel. I've been doing YouTube videos for a while featuring how to create images using ChatGPT, and that was sort of a means to an end to become familiar with the technology to hopefully be able to present videos on other serious topics, such as I'll use the phrase conversations about God from the theologian Graham Maxwell. I think that's a nice inviting term where the purpose will be to share some ideas that I have, and hopefully we can get some discussions going. So the first talk that I will be presenting is on Theodicy, and I'll move to a blog post which has some uh, bullet points and images developed with ChatGPT to have something to follow along while I'm speaking. But I wanted to start with this first one, which I thought was a fantastic image. This is one presenting the concept of Calvinism, where you have a divine scroll representing the decree of God that's prominent in Calvinism. So let's move on to the blog post, and uh, we'll start with an introduction as to what Theodicy is. It can be thought of as a defense of God's goodness to the question of, I'm going to add myself here. I didn't want myself to block that nice big image, but I'll add myself and also mention I had a car accident. So you can see my hand here. If you're wondering what that is, it's in a stent, and that's a comfortable way for me to hold my hand. Okay, so what is theodicy? It's a defense of God's goodness um, in view of the question of if God is good or just or loving um, and powerful, then why does evil exist? How did evil come to existence in the light of these attributes? There seems to be a contradiction in terms here. And I think this is a question that, very, very common question that thinking people have asked throughout the ages. So before I get to my own view, I'd like to discuss two prominent theological perspectives in Christianity, one being Calvinism and the other Arminianism. So under Calvinism, we have a concept of eternal decrees, where the world is the way that we know it because God has so decreed. So God had a plan, and he executed the plan, and things are the way that they are because that is the way that God planned it to be. We have, under Calvinism, God's sovereign decree is the foundation for everything, and the concept of God's ultimate authority and control over creation is emphasized. And in Arminianism, there is more of an emphasis on the choice of human beings, on free will. So, free will, there's a number of phrases in these discussions that it's important to try to be clear on, and also to be fair to the differing perspectives. So, what words mean differs from how one conceives of different terms within a given theological perspective that one has. And I'll try to be as fair as I can be in the use of language in the different theological ideas. And in particular, the concept of free will, that means different things to Calvinists than it means to Arminians. So, in the Calvinist perspective, Calvinists will assert that human beings have free will. And what they mean by that is a perspective of free will that's referred to as compatibilistic free will, which is a fancy term uh, where the compatibilistic has to do with compatible and is compatible with the concept of God's sovereignty within the framework of Calvinism. So the concept of free will for the Calvinist is that that men choose to do what they wish to do, and God does not interfere with the ability of men to exercise uh, their free choices. That's what free will means in Calvinism. And in Calvinism, what is highlighted or emphasized above all else is God's sovereignty. In Arminianism, there's a concept of free will that has, not surprisingly, the term incompatibilistic, or also libertarian is another term that's used. And in this concept, free will means that not only are men capable of doing what they choose to do, but men can choose to do A or not A, would be a way of putting it. That there are contrary choices that not only can be made, but affected, brought about, exercised. In other words, let's use an example. Under Arminianism, uh, a person could choose to either have pizza or not have pizza. And these would be two choices that could actually occur. Under Calvinism, only one of the choices can actually occur because God has sovereignly decreed one of the choices. But the choice under Calvinism would be a legitimate choice in that the person exercising the choice is doing what they choose to do. They do what they want to do. That would be the Calvinistic emphasis. The Arminian emphasis would be that men can choose to do either the one or the other, and they can actually do either the one or the other. Now, from my perspective, I'm going to present the idea that under both viewpoints, the pitfall is that God is responsible for evil. In the Calvinistic perspective or framework, that God is responsible for evil is inherent in the framework itself. And Calvinists openly accept this. Um, I'm going to quote from R.C. Sproul, a well known Calvinist, and he has an excellent video you can easily find on YouTube, just searching for R.C. Sproul and why evil exists, something like that. And in that video, he says that evil is not good, but it is good that evil exists. And he asserts that because God ordained it. So that's a logical conclusion, that if you believe that God ordained that evil should exist, then it would follow that it's a good thing that evil exists, because why else would God ordain it if that weren't the case? So that is the Calvinist perspective. God is responsible for the existence of evil because he ordained it. Okay, in the perspective of Arminianism, the argument is more subtle. It's a logical argument, and that's the idea of this particular illustration is I'm trying to illustrate a mathematical proof, because I'm going to try to present uh, a sort of analogous sort of proof, a logical proof, that under Arminianism, that God is responsible for the existence of evil. The idea that I have in mind is that it's right here. I'll underline this one here. So it's that God um, God created beings that He knew, both angelic and human, that He knew would with certainty would sin. The one being Lucifer, aka Satan, and the other Adam. So God could have created other beings besides these that, or could have, yeah, well, in the case of Lucifer, he could have just not have created him. Could have had one of the other angels be the chief angel. And in the case of Adam, he could have, and Eve, he could have chosen a different pair that he had foreseen would not sin. Now, Arminianists um, will assert that the fact that God foreknew what would happen, did not cause Adam and Eve to sin or cause Lucifer to sin. But the causation involved is not one of, say, force or something like that, but it's a logical causation. And that is that if God foresaw with certainty that certain events would transpire, such as that if he created Lucifer, Lucifer would certainly sin. And if he created Adam, Adam would certainly sin. It's not that God caused these beings to make these choices, but that God could have chosen to create other beings that he saw with certainty would not have sinned. So the fact that God chose to create these beings, knowing that they would sin, puts the responsibility logically back on God, because God could have chosen not to make these beings, but to make other beings instead. And there's no conceivable logical argument that God was interfering with the free choice of either Lucifer or Adam, or would have been interfering with these choices had you chose not to create these beings. I'm mentioning this because I've heard people make these arguments, but it's absurd, because if God hadn't made these beings, they wouldn't have existed. So they wouldn't have had any free will to be interfering with. Okay, so I'll move on to um, the perspective that I believe is correct, which is that God is not responsible uh, for the existence of evil um, under the open theistic kind of framework. And that's because the future does not consist of a single path, but of many paths. So I'm trying to illustrate this with this diagram here, where you have, this is the past, the present, and then the future. That's what's represented here. And so we do have a single line from the past to the present. There is reality as it happened. But when we get to the future branches out. And this, God's foreknowledge of the future is consistent with the reality of the future, which is that the future consists of multiple paths. And so when God created Lucifer, he saw the many different choices that Lucifer might make. And the future is comprised of all of these choices. That's what the future is. The future is not one single choice. And so one often hears the assertion against open theists that open theists do not believe that God that God sees the future. But that's not accurate because the future, from the perspective of open theists, is what's being drawn here. It's a multiplicity of possible paths. That is what the future is. And that is what God foresees. So there's no inconsistency in what God foresees and what God is. And it's not accurate to assert in the framework of open theism that God does not see the future. God does see the future. He sees the future as it is, which is a multiplicity of possible paths. So, under this perspective, I'm going to highlight this bullet point here. Under this perspective, one could say that God does have a limited responsibility for the existence of evil because God created beings with free will, uh, with the possibility that they would exercise a choice to rebel against Him, which unfortunately is indeed what happened. And God conceived of the plan of redemption in order to meet with that contingency uh, should that um, should that come about. But it wasn't God's plan. That's not what God wanted to have happen. And an analogy would be that human beings choose to have children. Their children might become evil. Uh, they might become serial murderers or something horrific like that. But any normal parent does not want their children to become evil, but they make the choice to bring children into the world because they have the hope that the children will become good adults. There's many reasons for choosing to have children, and those are analogous for the reasons that God chose to create sentient beings. He wanted beings that were capable of love and of being loved. And in order to have these capabilities, God created sentient beings with the ability to exercise free will. Okay, so I've presented a few perspectives. There's, of course, many more, but these are three major perspectives within Christianity. And I invite comments on from the ideas that have been presented, and request that any comments be made in a charitable way that would be consistent with with being a Christian, a follower of Christ. So I thank you for watching my channel and interested in any conversations. I'm interested in your points of view, so please do share. Thanks for watching. God bless.